Isaiah, so I appreciate you guys all coming and showing up for this thing. We are at the tail end of what's turned out to be about an eight-month series. We started like mid-January, I think, of this thing, and it's going to be 20 weeks long. So I appreciate you guys all hanging in there with us. And once again, we're at the very end of it with the 17th letter. There's only 18 letters in our series on the book of Isaiah called Return to Sender, where a prophetic postman delivers a messianic message with God's stamp of approval to a world gone postal. 17th letter is entitled Stamp of Approval, and it comes from Isaiah chapters 60 to 62. So we'll dive right in today and hopefully have some fun. It's sure to be a rollicking ride. We last left Isaiah, for all of you who were here last week. We actually left him discarding 6 bulgy envelopes and only pushing the one that was both firmly established and new every morning. All because it delights the Lord when we delight in the Lord. It's as simple as that. Curiously, tucked into the very bottom of this same envelope is folded up a set of plans giving instructions for a brand new invention, which takes us back to a suburb of ancient Jerusalem, circa 685 BC. Mom, where's Dad? Mrs. I was dusting an old bookcase in the living room, overflowing with its literary contents. By far the largest volume, and hanging by a thread from the top shelf, was not even a first edition, but was nonetheless a ragged old copy of what they called the Pentateuch, by best-selling author and former Prince of Egypt, Moses. Mrs. I repositioned the book from its precarious altitude, giving the bedraggled cover a wary look as she tucked the dog-eared loose pages back into place. Her prophetess mind could not help entertaining the suspicion that this once expensive, weighty tome was a publishing ploy cooked up by money changers to take advantage of its long-deceased but very famous author. 5 books in one was the advertising gimmick. Yeah, so convenient you can't even lift it, she thought with a fuss, as she patted down the partially torn spine. It's just the old Torah disguised in new packaging so that they can sell more copies. But her book nut of a husband had fallen for the sales pitch, the Pentateuch ploy as she called it, and bought the coffee table monster from the very first booth he came to at the city gate. As it stood there, the majority of the bookcase was filled with all manner of knee-jerk purchases her husband had made, law books, all 613 of them, the Diary of Adam and Eve, colorful children's books on the creation story, and a scribal cartographer's collection of maps showing possible routes of the Exodus. And there was even a depressing script to a long-running play called Job, where the eponymous main character has a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad couple of years until God gets in his face and asks him, "Who do you think made Australia?" The balance of shelves were occupied by required textbooks from rabbinical school, used over the past few years by their 2 boys. The only book strangely missing was one about the passage of time, as the younger, their baby, was all too soon graduating in just a few days. Mom! Mrs. I looked up, rag in hand, at her son, who was still standing in the middle of the living room, holding a wrinkled-up scroll with a panicked look on his face. "I need help with my speech!" Just like his older brother, a remnant will return, their second boy, swift to plunder and quick to carry away, was graduating with high honors and had been asked to represent the student body with a commencement address. Not knowing what exactly to say, he wanted to pick the brain of his prophetic father, who had made a career out of speechifying. "He's in the garage," was his mother's answer, with a roll of her eyes. There was a perplexing pause. Mr. I was not known to be handy. So why was he all of a sudden in the garage? Certainly not to tinker with anything. He could manufacture all sorts of literary styles and sentence structures, but a simple 3-legged stool was beyond him. But in the garage he was, and had been for weeks. He had purchased sheets of metal from Tubal-Cain's machine shop, a long-standing family business, since 4000 BC, so said the sign out front, which was obviously an exaggeration. The I family had heard all kinds of eerie, wobbly sounds of metal bending emanating from behind the house, along with loud hammering and the sinister crackle of flames. With a follow-me jerk of her head in the direction of the sounds, Mrs. I led her son out to the garage with his curious older brother following behind. Upon opening the door to the garage, there stood Mr. I, hammer in hand, black with soot, looking upward like some grimy astronomer, using what he knows to predict what he foresees. In front of him were 3 large metal barrels, each bolted to platforms on rollers, capable of rocking in teeter-totter-like fashion. Fires were now blazing in the round pits while they were tilted in 3 different directions. Through a wide skylight in the garage ceiling, the family could clearly see beams of light shooting into the night sky from their home, making 3 orange moving orbs swaying across the heavens. "I need to get the city's attention," said Mr. I, by way of explanation, never taking his eyes off the 3 garish beacons scanning the firmament. "But I'm going to need some help rolling these to the temple court," he admitted with a frustrated sigh. "What do you call them?" asked Mrs. I, with hands skeptically positioned on her hips. Mr. I finally lowered his head and looked straight at his family. "Searchlights," he said. With that, open your Bibles to Isaiah chapter 60, verse 1. Isaiah 60, verse 1. And I'm in the New International Version, as usual. We've been doing this whole series, or I have been doing this whole series from this particular translation. Isaiah 60, verse 1. "Arise, Jerusalem. Let your light shine for all to see, for the glory of the Lord rises to shine on you. Darkness as black as night covers all the nations of the earth, but the glory of the Lord rises and appears over you. All nations will come to your light. Mighty kings will come to see your radiance." These verses not only describe what we might call God's wake-up call to Jerusalem, but the dawning of a brand new day for all the nations of the world, including those in Asia, particularly members of the church in Ephesus 745 years later. This dawning light is not from the sun, but from the blinding glory of God shining on the city. Historically, on this planet, God's glory has covered the newly created earth. It once dwelt in the tabernacle, then it dwelt in the temple, and then in the person of Jesus Christ, and now through individuals in the church, and will finally be revealed throughout the earth when the Messiah returns to reign in Jerusalem, the capital city of the restored Jewish nation, where Jesus Christ shall sit on his throne forever. In essence, Isaiah is singing, "Mine eyes have seen the glory." Isaiah chapter 5, verses 1 through 7, where much of that hymn comes from. But this glory, the Hebrew word is kabod, this glory is never for oneself. It is always shared. It is always given away. It is always reflecting what is weighty, what is significant, what is real. The glory of God that rises on his people and dawns and draws them to him is the solid reality of God's holy character. And this source of this reflected glory is, get this, transcendent. Don't forget that word. It's a big, giant $3 seminarian word, but it's significantly important in our perception. Outside of his creation is where he is, where he lives and breathes and has his being, as it were. His transcendence is outside creation, but it is most imminent in its force, right here, right now. Look at verse 19 of chapter 60. Isaiah chapter 60, verse 19. "No longer will you need the sun to shine by day, nor the moon to give its light by night. For the Lord your God will be your everlasting light, and your God will be your glory. Your sun will never set, your moon will not go down, for the Lord will be your everlasting light. Your days of mourning will come to an end." This is the light of God's transcendence, unaffected by and fully operational outside of our time-space history, which is, I submit to you, the ultimate solution to our puny, five-pointed predestination free will debate. Transcendence is a reality check that runs through the entire book of Isaiah. The Almighty God is holy in his otherness, not just different, but other. an other holiness that is not only morally pure, but is sovereign. So says Isaiah 18 times in this book, his book. And that sovereign holiness existing and functioning with total control over our little hamster ball sphere of creation chose from the outside to come inside and be the saving next of kin for his lost people. As the Apostle Paul admonished the Philippians 740 years later to think about such things, a mind stored with, assured of, and resting on the great facts of a transcendent God and his salvation is a mind at rest. The issue is, how often do you think about such things? Is it any wonder a dozen chosen Israelites over 700 years earlier were instructed by their general to each select one large, heavy boulder out of the wet sand from the very center of the miraculously parted, freshly crossed Jordan riverbed? They propped them upright using their breaking backs and creaky shoulders until they were raised rock solid in formation like crossing guards at the recent quickly drying intersection between Ark of the Covenant and Children of Israel. This henge of stones would be a permanent reminder of what God had done, especially when the Jordan River resumed its natural flow and the tops of the 12 immovable monoliths, standing tall, could be seen even from a distance, poking out above the splashing rapids and relentless currents foaming around their bases. For years to come, children would point and ask their parents while standing on the riverbank, looking at the strange circle of ancient rocks rising up out of the rushing river, "What are those?" To which parents would reply, "Why, those are what we call Ebenezer's, stones of help. They remind us of what God has done for us and what he can and will do for us in the future." But we must never forget that they were chosen and positioned out of the dead center of these mighty waters when they were divinely parted, to remind us that no matter how high the rough, swelling waters may eventually rise in our tumultuous lives, God is still our highly capable rock and refuge, right in the thick of it. As such, the Lord purposes that his people should be gathered to him without any compromise to his transcendence and to his holiness. With the hesitant help of Mr. I's 2 conscripted boys and some brawny volunteer neighbors from their cul-de-sac, 3 large wooden ox carts, each carrying the 3 metal fire pits, are carefully guided out of the garage, and with great precision they make the sharp right turn on their slow and methodical journey to the temple court. Mr. I is bringing up the rear when his wife profoundly calls out, finally asking from her perch on the front porch, "Why?" Mr. I turns around and spontaneously responds with such spirit and eloquence that the prophetess knows instantly that these prayerful words are so masterminded that they are sure to make it into the closing chapters of her husband's ongoing book. Because I love Zion, and I will not keep still. Because my heart yearns for Jerusalem, I cannot remain silent. I will not stop praying for her until her righteousness shines like the dawn, and her salvation blazes like a burning torch. Isaiah 62, verse 1. Here's a question for you. Are you attracted to this same light? Here's a better question for those of you who are. Are you attractive with this light? Just like those 3 Persian wise guys 685 years later, who would take to Camelback and trudge westward nearly 1,500 miles with their gift bags to get a glimpse by starlight of a makeshift, mangy cattle stall crib containing their messianic maker. Isaiah's searchlights are a great success, compelling those far and wide to see for themselves what all the commotion is about, and strangely singing a Christmas carol long before its time. I saw 3 ships. Now get this. It's bothered me all my life. A song made geographically impossible 2,500 years later, with lyrics about seeing ships come sailing in miraculously to a landlocked Bethlehem. Did anyone check that before they wrote that down? I don't know if that bothers you, but you find out this Christmas that that isn't a rock in your shoe when you hear that song. They sailed into Bethlehem on Christmas Day, on Christmas Day. You can't! Just say it. Isaiah chapter 60, verse 4. Chapter 60, verse 4. Look and see, for everyone is coming home. Your sons are coming from distant lands. Your little daughters will be carried home. Your eyes will shine, and your heart will thrill with joy. For the merchants from around the world will come to you. They will bring you the wealth of many lands. This will be a great, peaceful, worldwide gathering from both land and sea, all traveling to and for the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Converging caravans of camels carrying gold and frankincense, flocks of acceptable sacrificial sheep and rams trotting on the ground, while flocks of doves, like flying clouds over Israel, swoop down to make their new nests in the holy city. Great ships with bumper stickers reading "From the ends of the earth" will not only be heavy with the precious cargo of silver and gold, but also with crowds of people filled with splendor, originally hailing from Israel, now standing like statues at the railing, straining their eyes for that first glimpse of liberty, their once faraway homeland. Some ships will even have the prophetic claim to fame of originating from that trusty 70-year-old harbor better known as Jonah's hideout. With their once powerful conquered king's blessings, foreigners from all around the world will serve day and night, feeding the flocks, plowing the fields, and tending the vineyards, and to help rebuild and refurbish both Israelite towns and Jerusalem's glorious, beautiful temple using the very best of Lebanese cypress, fir, and pine. And it's all bankrolled by the wealth of many lands in order to satisfy Israel's every need, like a nursing mother, with previous tormentors and their offspring now bowing down and kissing her feet, making a once hated and despised nation off the beaten path beautiful forever. A joy to all generations, surrounded by city walls of salvation, where within are protected courtyards filled with grain and flowing with new wine. The people worldwide have been cut loose, just like the exploding population of Israelites who, like us, had been deliberately, strategically planted where God would have them grow, oftentimes unnaturally, in order to bring him the most glory. I've said this before, but I was required to memorize all sorts of scripture when I was at Biola as an undergrad, and it was always New American Standard Bible. That was 82. That was the great translation, because it was word for word inaccurate. And so I ended up memorizing Jeremiah 17, verse 8, and I always thought it was interesting, you know, blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord and whose trust is the Lord, for he will be like a tree planted by the water and that extends its roots by a stream and will not fear when the heat comes, but its leaves will be green and it will not be anxious in a year of drought, but will never cease to yield fruit. And I've never thought about it till now, and that's been 40 years now, nearly, planted. We always keep thinking those are indigenous trees when we picture that scenario, and it's repeated often in Scripture. We're going to get to one in just a second here. Planted. Go back to transcendence now, folks. Planted. You didn't just spring up next to that brook or river on your own. You were strategically planted by another. He or she will be like a tree planted by the water. Wow, yeah. You were planted. Wherever you find yourself located, you were planted. Look at Isaiah chapter 61, verse 3. 61, verse 3. To all who mourn in Jerusalem, he will give a crown of beauty for ashes, a joyous blessing instead of mourning, a festive praise instead of despair. In their righteousness, they will be like great oaks that the Lord has planted for his own glory. Exchanging an ash heap for a crown of beauty, God's people now have double portions of honor, prosperity, and everlasting joy all around. they have become oaks of righteousness. A far cry from Isaiah chapter 1, verse 30. For any of you who were there back in January, we've come a long way, as have the children of Israel, from chapter 1 to chapter 61. Because in chapter 1, they were described as oaks with withered leaves. Potentially great trees languishing in a garden without water. Look at them now. Or better put, look at us now, planted by the water that extends its roots by a stream. Now they are the holy people, redeemed by the Lord, citizens of a restored Jerusalem, which is now a desirable place. It's no longer a city forsaken, which was its tagline for so many years and decades and centuries. Great oaks of returned exiles who now have the Word of God ringing in their ears with what we would call an aha moment. For though I have destroyed you in my anger, I will now have mercy on you through my grace. Isaiah 60, verse 10. And this is also clearly depicted historically in the three parts of, wait for it, God's rock, paper, scissors, that depict the three historical epochs of the book of Isaiah. And we've been working on this thing since January. Hopefully you guys know it's stone cold. If you don't, I'm going to embarrass you right now. So here we go. God's rock, paper, scissors. It's all done now, so this is the completed version, okay? Fist here, hand out here. Assyria crushes northern Israel. Babylon smothers Assyria and southern Judah. Cyrus cuts up Babylon, who I missed, and cuts loose Israel. One more time for the sake of attention. Here we go. Assyria crushes northern Israel. Babylon smothers Assyria and southern Judah. Cyrus cuts up Babylon and cuts loose Israel. You guys are doing very well with that. You got one more crack at this thing in 2 weeks, by the way. This is all brought to you by the bearer of good news, capital B, by the way. Right after the devil left him, defeated from his own three-pronged temptation go-round in the wilderness, a victorious Jesus began day 41 of his 3-year ministry by going back to his homeland in Nazareth and to those old scriptural stomping grounds of the synagogue. He was selected as the scripture reader young'un for the day. 30-year-old Jesus unrolled the Dead Sea Scroll marked Isaiah and rattled off chapter 61, verses 1 and 2. When finished, he handed the scroll back to the synagogue librarian, sat down in the front row, and confidently said aloud, "That's me!" And what he read was a real eye-opener. Look at Isaiah chapter 61, verse 1. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me, for the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He sent me to comfort the brokenhearted and to proclaim that captives will be released and prisoners will be freed. He has sent me to tell those who mourn that the time of the Lord's favor has come, and with it, the day of God's anger against their enemies. With this good news still ringing in his ears, Isaiah gives what I would call a musical review of sorts, touching on themes that he has previously mentioned throughout this entire book. Here's theme number 1. And if you've been with this series, you probably are going to find these very familiar. Rebuilding ancient ruins. He was all over that. Isaiah 61, verse 4. Theme number 2, the return of justice. Isaiah 61, verses 8 and 11. Theme number 3, holding the hand of God. Isaiah 62, verse 3. And this has with it Isaiah's distinction between, and you have heard this before from me, the arm of God, all right, which is a symbol of his personal power, versus the hand of God, which is the symbol of his personal intervention in all of our lives. Theme number 4, reliable watchman. I love this. Isaiah 62, verse 6. O Jerusalem, I have posted watchmen on your walls. They will pray day and night continually. Take no rest, all you who pray to the Lord. The reason I love this is because Isaiah's already gone through a diatribe in Isaiah chapter 22, verses 15 to 25. We talked about it in letter number 9, which I titled Mail Fraud. And he went on and on about these irresponsible watchmen that Jerusalem hired. I guess maybe the pool was not that good. The quality coming out of the colleges back then were not that great, but they got these two guys, Shebna and Eliakim, who were just terrible at their job. Isaiah then and now envisions a watchman who takes no rest, does his job, praying day and night, just like the Lord will have no rest until he establishes Jerusalem and makes her the pride of the earth. Theme number 5, a well-watered garden. Chapter 61, verse 11. Take a look at that. 61, verse 11. The sovereign Lord will show his justice to the nations of the world. Everyone will praise him. His righteousness will be like a garden in early spring with plants springing up everywhere. Plants springing up everywhere is God's strategic salvation in the form of our rescue, our deliverance, and our relocation. And all this is being carried out in a spirit of righteousness, which prompted all of this in the first place, folks, conforming to all of the righteous requirements of a holy God. Theme number 6 is the holy highway, which we've talked about. Isaiah 62, verse 10. And theme number 7, all those children. All these multiplying kids that are coming out of the bereft children of Israel after their 70-year exile. Isaiah 60, verse 4 and verse 22. And you ask yourself this question, I'm sure they did, and where is there land enough to hold them all when they're coming back? And I can see those ships coming in right on the land, as the Christmas Carol said, full of kids. What do we do with them all? Last week, the Sabbath observance that we talked about, and I said that too has been married to God for a relational purpose. That's why it's a day of rest. What we didn't realize, though, when I said that the Sabbath was married to God as an observance, I didn't tell you that it was, in fact, a double wedding. What makes things even more interesting is that God actually switches the name tags at the reception, just to make it interesting. Look at Isaiah chapter 62, verse 4. Never again will you be called the forsaken city or the desolate land. Your new name will be the city of God's delight and the bride of God, for the Lord delights in you and will claim you as his bride. Obviously, my translation, the New Living, calls this name the bride of God. In the Hebrew, it would be translated in English best as Beulah land, capital B. That would be in the New International Version, if you've got one there. English Standard Version, King James Version, all translate this new name, bride of God, actually translated as Beulah land. That's your new name. Meaning, married to God. That's what it means, pure and simple. Your land will no longer be desolate, for God's pleasure is now in you, and your land will be married to him. Here are the ramifications for us here in Parker, Colorado, August 2019. No matter where God calls you, or better put, plants you, no matter how many times God moves you, replants you, no matter how big or small the real estate, wedding bells are ringing from the roof over your head. Beulah land. Did you get it? Beulah land. To make this point, let me give you a very brief history of Brad and Cindy Brown's land marriages. Not our own marriage, the land marriages. We didn't even know there was one, but there was one. We've had 4 of those ceremonies now. Here's how they go. Right after we got married, we bought a home in Burbank. It was on Myers Street. The lot size. Now remember, this is suburban. Okay, so I get it. Out here with all the acreage, I get it. You're going to go, oh brother, you're supposed to stand. I get it. But for us, woo, huge, right? The lot size was 6,832 square feet. Wow. Had trees in the back and everything else, It was great. We lived there for 4 years. That was a marriage. The second marriage to land was on Cleveland Road in Glendale. Lot size was 6,300 square feet. not quite as big, but the house was bigger. We were there for 23 years. That was the second wedding.
Really?
The third wedding, which we didn't know it, was on a place called Clark Avenue in Burbank. The lot size there, we'll get this now, 7,365 square feet. That's big for Burbank. It's a corner lot. You know how they say corner lots are the way they allocated them. 6 years we were there. This is where it gets interesting. Our fourth marriage, okay, to our current home in Franktown, Colorado, has a lot size, 135,036 square feet, which means this. And I didn't know, and I'll admit this to all of you because you all know I'm just green and Californian and you keep coming back. But anyway, when we first bought this property, I said, well, it's 3.1 acres. Like, how big's an acre? So I did some calculations on a slow day in the insurance office, which was daily. And, oh, let me just take a look here. So I got online, figured out how much an acre was square footage-wise, figured out the average of the 3 houses, land marriages, that we have had in our married life. And I realized that the average land size that we have had here with our 3 homes in Southern California is about 6,832 square feet. Now, okay, that doesn't help me at all. All I know is Southern California, so I don't really get the picture here because remember, we bought the house sight unseen. So we hadn't moved out, we haven't flown out here yet to see it during the inspection. So what's this look like? So I did the calculations, and I realized that the average size, if the average size of our 3 homes is 6,832, then our new land that we just bought could fit 19 of that piece of land. 19 of them could fit on our current property on Elkhorn Drive. That was mind-boggling to me. Or as I should say, and should have said, that's a big wedding. To whom much is given, much is required. That's a lot of Beulah land, according to Isaiah, and that land is not mine. And that land has never been mine. It is married to God, and it always will be. Here it is for you and I. Whether you live in an apartment, a condo, a suburban house, or a sprawling ranch. Look at the square footage upon which you walk, and you now call your home from this day forward, folks, you call it Beulah land. Isaiah 62:4. It has been given by God. It is married to God, and therefore it should be used by God. 24/7. And remember, we need to never lose sight of that fact. Never, ever lose sight of that fact. Even this is brand new information for you from Isaiah 62, verse 4. But remember that if you do lose sight of that fact, here's what happens. Discontentment with divine arrangements always matches discontentment with divine worship. If this becomes a problem for you because the Joneses have a bigger piece of land or a smaller whatever, discontentment with divine arrangements always matches discontentment with divine worship. This stuff can really trip you up on a Sunday morning and you don't even make the connection. The land is married to God. The square footage in the apartment is married to God. The motorhome or trailer or cardboard box under the freeway is married to God. That's the point. The fact is this. What's under your feet is betrothed to who is over your head. Whether you're a land baron or even a city slicker, which brings us to the city of Zion and our citizenship. A vision whose radiance was caught by Isaiah more fully than anyone else, and who describes it as a strong city of salvation. The city of Zion will be a city of peace, where, get this, go figure, well-being and government are synonymous. I'm going to let you just sit on that. Well-being and government are synonymous. It's a city filled with believers, perfected people finally living in the full reality of their finished salvation. So, with Isaiah, we can say with wondering delight that the citizenship of ours is my joy. Its privileges are already mine. The vision is not too good to be true. Rather, as guaranteed by the Lord, it is too good not to be true. Look at Isaiah chapter 62, verse 11. The Lord has sent this message to every land. Tell the people of Israel, look, your Savior is coming. See, he brings his reward with him as he comes. They will be called the holy people, and the people redeemed by the Lord. And Jerusalem will be known as the desirable place, and no longer the city, no longer forsaken. Verse 12 is interesting. The translation here is, in the New Living Translation is, and Jerusalem will be known as the desirable place. Actually, a more literal translation of that sentence is, hear this, your name will be called sought, as in sought after. Your name will be called sought. Think of that for just a minute. So, by example, if I get this correctly, and I think I agree with this, our churches then need to not only be seeker sensitive, but sought sensitive as well. A dynamic, ongoing cycle trickling down from pulpit to playground of growing new converts lapping up milk after just walking through the door into long-term church pillars feasting on solid food every chance that they get. Why? 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, because according to the Apostle Paul, we need to be able to talk to each other at a level of spiritual depth just as soon as possible. The days are evil. And this was the tumultuous time that Paul was writing in. He really meant what he said. This is a conversational catechism, as it were, for as long as it takes. That might start with the opening line of, I like your hat. Thanks. Or turban, that's better put. Look at Isaiah 62, verse 3. And we'll close with this. The Lord will hold you in his hand for all to see, a splendid crown in the hand of God. Isaiah 62:3. A splendid crown in the hand of God. Actually, a more literal Hebrew translation would be this. A turban of kingliness in the grip of your God. A turban of kingliness in the grip of your God. We must be good stewards of growing those in our care, whom, according to Isaiah, the Lord holds firmly in his right hand. The same Lord cannot keep silent, nor can he keep still about the fact that those who are his are not only the apple of his eye, after making such a mess of things, snatched from the wholesale nuking of the sinful effects of the fall, they are now pardoned and wearing a splendid crown. That's you and that's me. Isaiah 62:3. A splendid crown. Now that is quite the stamp of approval. Isaiah's P.S. at the bottom of his 17th letter to us is him speaking on behalf of the Jewish remnant who, like us, are praising God for all that he has done for us and is doing right now and will do in the future. We have been delivered from a relationship of captivity, internal and external, into a relationship of worth and dignity. But we have not been delivered from a relationship into independence. We have been delivered from a destructive relationship into an enabling one. The result of this redemption is a belonging in which the character of the one to whom we belong is now replicated in us. And so we will all agree with Isaiah's P.S. to us today, which is Isaiah 61, verse 10. And it says this, I am overwhelmed with joy in the Lord my God, for he has dressed me with the clothing of salvation and draped me in a robe of righteousness. Looks like our splendid crown just got an outfit to go with it. Next week, 2 weeks actually, is our last time. Isaiah's 18th letter. It's his final letter to us, the conclusion of our series, Return to Sender. If you're reading along, read Isaiah chapter 63 to 66. All the way up to the book's surprising, horrifying ending. No joke, I kid you not. It all comes to you, though, via certified mail that fortunately has already been signed for by another. Let's close in prayer. Father, again, just thank you so much for this incredible journey that we're on with this book that is just so far beyond us at so many levels. But I'm sure Isaiah, when he penned it, probably felt a lot of that too. We just thank you for the way we can dabble, how deeply we can troll into these areas, particularly this case, with the stamp of approval, and how you've planted us to be wherever you want us to be to give you the most glory. And that has been a strategic, deliberate move. And we never lose sight of that, because we have been planted by you, wherever we have found ourselves. And that, too, is Beulah land. It is married to you. And that, too, is a reminder of the marriage that is to come, where we will be with you forever. And in the meantime, we are to reflect the very one who provided this relationship in the first place, our next of kin. We just thank you so much for all the incredible, cosmic, dynamic, life-changing facts that are in this book. But they're more than that. This is not an academic exercise. This is the ingesting of spiritual ammunition that will change us from the inside out if we so let it. I pray that we'd start today, if we haven't already, to start changing our perspectives, shifting our focus, understanding the Beulah land, understanding the marriage, understanding this incredible stamp of approval, which you have called now a crown of splendor, accompanied by these robes of salvation and cloaks of righteousness. What an incredible ensemble that you have put on us, undeservedly so. I pray that we would walk around like that this week, knowing who we are, but most importantly, knowing whose we are. I pray that you get the glory for whatever happens this week as we go through our days, our hours, our minutes, our seconds, grappling with these thoughts. Or, as the Apostle Paul said in Philippians 4, thinking about such